This panel is about how to unleash European AI leadership in the mobility sector. Because, well, AI is a promising solution to make urban mobility more effective and safer. You know, for driving, we hear a lot about that in the headlines, but it actually can help in reducing human error and improving efficiency in transportation networks. But to make sure that we can harness the potential of the technology to its fullest, we will need data, more data. We will need better analytics. We will need increased testing. And so this panel will discuss the potential role of AI in mobility solutions and where Europe stands when it comes to, you know, autonomous and semi-autonomous vehicles and smart cities and a few other areas. We will also discuss the development of safety standards and the best practices, the creation of innovative transportation services and policies that our panelists believe are necessary to support existing solutions and a transition to safe mobility in the EU. I think we have our three panelists today. Unfortunately, Claire Depré of the Commission of DG Move was not able to join, but we'll have, I'm sure, a great conversation with the three of you, introducing you, each of you, starting with Marianne Glaser, your co-founder and Chief Executive Officer of Brighter AI, Dr. Michael Kopp, your Director of Data Science and Head of Research at Here Technologies. Perhaps you have your camera that, yes, here we go. Hello, Michael, nice to have you with us. I've recently interviewed you, and I just want to quickly mention to our participants that they can check the interview we did on the website of the Center for Data Innovation. It was very interesting. And then last but not least, we have Nacho Rodriguez Solis, your lead data scientist for Vodafone Business. Thank you all for joining today. And yes, this is me, not Matthew. But let's get started with a few questions. So maybe starting broadly with, you know, how I mentioned some of the ways in which AI can be helpful in mobility. Let's just discuss that to start with. In what ways do you see AI can improve urban mobility, and what are what is the timeline that you see is needed or can be expected for any improvements to take place? And what do governments, what can governments like EU level, but also member states, how can they help in supporting the efforts that you know, you're working on in your respective organization? Let's start with you, Nacho. Would you like to take this question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Lynn. Well, that's something very important for us in Vodafone Business, and we are actually helping many different, especially local governments that are typically in charge of urban mobility and this kind of challenge. What we are basically doing with them is using AI and location data insights to first understand the different patterns that there are in urban mobility, in traffic, not only vehicles, but also people, of course. And thanks to those insights, they can then optimize public transport, for example, on different, not only trains or also bus schedule, for example. And as a consequence, what we can see is how commuting times can be reduced, and even traffic jams can be reduced, right? So that will be like the direct impact on collaborating directly with local governments. But it's also true that we are seeing an increasing number of different players in urban mobility, like, for example, car sharing companies, right, and startups and in our cities, and we're also collaborating with them so they can optimize their services too. They, for example, helping them to understand which locations may be better for having a better impact on urban mobility. And probably a factor that I think that is going to be very important is also all the impact on the electric cars and the new electric car network for chargers for those cars. And I think it's very interesting how this digital AI transformation is very related also to the green transformation that we're seeing. And we are also helping them to understand where to or how to deploy that new network of chargers. So as a consequence, with all those three different factors, I think that we are using AI to have like a smarter, with more options and even greener urban mobility, which I think is the purpose of it, to have a better urban mobility combining all those factors. About the timeline, I think it's now. I mean, it's happening. It's been happening for a while, but it's now we are seeing huge traction on the market all across different countries in Europe, and especially big cities, but even medium and smaller cities too. So I think the time is really now. It's happening.
And then just follow-up question about what Vodafone Business is doing in the space of I think in the space of smart cities, right? So how can you tell me a little bit about how those initiatives that you're developing are addressing mobility challenges, and maybe tell us about, you know, whether there's some best practices we can think of, and where do we need to see more support from policies, more investment and more innovation?
So, yeah, of course, like our, let's say like the first step or the more typical step that different cities are taking when they start being involved in this smart cities environment is typically related to what we have just said, right, about urban mobility, trying to optimize maybe public transport network, or maybe they are worried about the amount of traffic jams or huge commuting times, those kind of things. But it's very interesting how, and we are helping them doing so now. But about where are we seeing more innovation and next steps, I think that one of the big differentiators of what we are doing with our clients in the local government space and in the smart city space is that we are not only focusing on that. It's not only about traffic. It's not only about mobility, but you can use that also for example, tourism, which is a huge industry. For example, in Spain, in Italy, in Portugal, we are helping them to understand, okay, that mobility, but when it's, how are those tourists actually moving, or whether are they staying, why I'm not getting this amount of tourists, or I am actually getting them, what's the different seasonalities, all those kinds of things. So it's not only about urban transport, but it's also about tourism. It's about, for example, waste management, about energy management. It's about even public lighting. So we can use that the location data and location insights to optimize a very broad amount of different local city services. And I think that's where the innovation is gonna come. Like not using it just for trying to optimize public transport network, which is happening, but also trying to apply that to different verticals, and also to make that more accessible to every citizen. So right now we are doing that and we are optimizing the services, but it's something that typically is happening between us and the city government. But to open that data, that algorithms, that decisions to the public, to every citizen, so it can be more like a two-way communication. I think that's something that we're gonna see in the next months or years, and of course having those response like to be more real time, like quicker, and so we can respond also quick to changes in the city, which we know is a living environment, right?
Thanks very much. I think we'll definitely get back to how, you know, what kind of policies we can encourage to make sure we have, you know, location data, you know, and maybe more open data available and accessible. But first, I'd like to turn to you, Michael. So I know that Here Technologies, you know, as a European company, we're all very proud of. Here is using AI quite a lot, doing a lot in that space to improve urban mobility. Perhaps let's start with what does that mean? What does Here, you know, how does Here work towards improving urban mobility? And maybe what could, you know, what kind of initiatives? Where do you implement that? How do you bring technological solutions to improve your products? How does that work? And I know you're working on entire smart cities. You also think through how the technology can help in generate lower CO2 emissions. So tell us a little bit about what you do in that space.
Sure. Oh, that's very kind. So thanks very much, first of all, for having me. I like your question. I also like Nacho's points very much. So the future is here, even though it's a bit of a cliche. So today, I will give you a bit of an outline what we do today. I'll then try and say something about actually that I believe this AI revolution, I mean, overnight protein structures solved. I mean, not something one would have expected in the next 50 years, I think, that this revolution can completely usurp the way smart cities can be run. And then finally, maybe to your first question, if you want, or we can do it later in the section, maybe what we see on the policy front or what should happen there and how this can be supported. So today we do quite a lot, and we do ADAS, so it's driving assistance. We do routing, of course, that's traditional services, but also that's extended now. So multimodal routing, where people can take different modes of transport, first the train, then you walk there, and then you go there and there, to fleet routing, where actually this is a highly complex problem because your choice to move one element of the fleet will affect its ability to respond to the next thing, be it a taxi fleet, be it a delivery vehicle fleet, or be it actually the entire smart city. So we're working in this space. We have lots of initiatives like park and ride apps, which we do with Deutsche Bahn or a startup in Stuttgart, I think. So there are a lot of things which you would expect a location intelligence provider to kind of do and like slowly expand the portfolio we have. If I now look at also what I'm mostly working on at the possibility of AI, I really do think the sky is the limit. So I think some of the biggest advances in recent years were in reinforcement learning. So, you see these computers playing games which are normally pretty hard to do, and not just Go, but World of Warcraft type games or Dota 2, where there's strategy and ability to do things. And if you take this advance and you stick it into a smart city, you could actually now, as you mentioned, sort of say, why not essentially get an AI to learn how we run that city, to learn to smartly change traffic lights, to maybe, if we have a more autonomous fleet, to slow down traffic in places, accelerate it in other ones, to maybe help us, and we see this today with the mobility platform providers, or like companies that provide mobility or even multi-stop mobility, like in the US, you have several companies like Lyft. Maybe this can be planned on a much larger scale, and that might actually even mean that you could change how we do deliveries. Why not do it in a normal vehicle? And I guess what prevents us today is security, but that can maybe be solved technologically, but also the logistics of it, the actual control theory, like how do you route a packet with millions of driving units, and some may think they go there, but they break down or they change their mind and so on. How can you have a security that this works? And we have, in a way, the prototype of the means to do it. And I think that is new. So to me, really, the sky is the limit in that area. And I think if I may say in our interview, we talked about city planning, the same thing. I think, what would a modern city look like? And I liked your question very much. I would love to see it. I think we all have sci-fi movies where this is done, but there are so many elements. How do we want to live our lives? What's practical? What's safe? And so on. And all these rules actually determine a game. What's economical? And then the question is now, what's the winning strategy in that game? Would be precisely this game playing or reinforcement learning solver or control theory solver again. And so what emerges out of there, again, I'd love to see. So I think there's large areas which can be observed. And then lastly, if we go into policy, and maybe you hear me say this a lot, I do worry that, so we do need regulation, but we need smart regulation. I do worry that we overregulate. Type approval for things where we don't really know what role they'll play. is not a good idea, right? It's good that we have maybe a different view than the UN, but to be honest, if it leads to killing off innovation in a time where this nascent technology comes, it's maybe also not a great thing. And I always get the feeling that this is driven by fear, actually. And I say this, I come from near Stuttgart originally. So I grew up with essentially the economic hub of that area is the automotive industry and Zulieferer, so suppliers, if you like. I do feel that many of the initiatives I see, they come out of this new technology could actually take something away from us, rather than seeing the massive potential of how it could change our lives, and obviously the economic upside that comes with it. So that would be, in a summary, I mean, it was a very broad question, but
no, it's true. I did ask a broad question, but I think we'll have time to elaborate on that. But I'd really like to follow up on something you said, and something one of our keynote speakers this morning said. So you mentioned the sky is the limit, and MEP Jalan Silva earlier this morning said, we should maybe, it is, innovation involves risks, AI involves risks, but we shouldn't fear those risks. We should just, really make sure we address them, but it shouldn't stop us from embracing the technology. But when it comes to technologies for automated driving, there's mixed press when it comes to the liability, the robustness. It goes to headlines. Can you tell us, just before I move on to our third panelist, Marianne, where the technology is heading, in terms of development, deployment, and use? You said the sky is the limit. How confident are you that that we can also alleviate all these concerns and make sure that the benefits of AI are really understood by all?
No, I like your question there. So this is obviously both an ethical and political question, because I think no technology that has not public acceptance can ever gain widespread use, and it would be fatal to do that. I think the key is in understanding what these technologies are. I think the key is also in making sure everyone's taken along, so education in a way, also not hiding the shortcomings, as you said. This is, people use the term black box in weird ways, but in many ways, these algorithms, we cannot vouch that they do what they do, but we can test them 1 billion times. And in a way, one has to maybe accept that it's literally, although I don't want to commit sacrilege, but it's literally akin to maybe us looking at if we certify a human for driving or something. So this is also black box. We know that someone has gone through a certain amount of training, and then we want to see that this actually is verified. And of course, I'm not trying to put AI and humans on the same level here, but I think the philosophy that we cannot completely audit it, yes, but on the other hand, we can test it in billions and billions of situations, and we need to agree what good situations are, and we need to maybe have a social acceptance of the fact that we cannot be 100% sure, and as a society accept the upside and downside. That's important. The first part of your question was really, where are we? In my opinion, we're probably not as far as the first initial euphoria a few years ago would have dictated, but I actually think we've come quite a bit of the way. I believe key technologies are reinforcement learning, what I already mentioned, and so this has really, in a way, reduced the problem of, or even the hope, you could even have a hope of building a self-driving AI to essentially building a realistic simulator. And even that is an extraordinarily hard problem, as we're now finding out. There are many elements in there, and of course the company I work for is in some of them HD live map. What role does it play, and its kind of quality and the speed of update? These are all kind of key questions that are playing out right now. And also maybe behind my comment that we don't really quite know yet where this technology is going, and maybe regulating it before that's known, not a great idea.
Thank you very much. I will now leave you because I see our great moderator, Matthew, is with us. Thank you so much for having made it. And just briefly mention, we also did an interview with Marianne Glaser, so I encourage our participants to read them both. Thank you all, and I will see you soon. I wish you a good, fruitful conversation. I'm sure it'll be great. Thank you.
and I deeply apologize for not being able to log in. So welcome, and I see the questions we have on the right-hand screen side of the screen. But perhaps I can start out with some specific questions for the speakers. So for Michael, I would just like to know a little bit more, if you can tell us a little bit of details on the technology that you're familiar with. And I was able to read the interview that you did with Ellie. So what I was really interested in is the advanced control theory that that you talked about, and if you can go a little bit more into that, and
Sure.
just describe a little bit how that can develop smart cities and cut emissions, that'd be great.
Sure. I think so. Some of the, if you like, buzzwords in that field is reinforcement learning. So it actually all it allows you to do is to reduce extremely hard problems like build a self-driving car, or can you please route an entire fleet, not just one vehicle from A to B, but entire fleets which have certain tasks to solve, like delivery fleets or taxi fleets, or actually the entire smart city, where your aim now is to reduce CO2 emissions but still get everyone in time from A to B. How can you build something that actually solves this in a real world sense of the word? And I guess in the past, and I'm a mathematician by training, in the past you would have said this is a NP complete, highly complex problem where if you try to solve it by just simulating lots of outcomes, you'll never get there. I think the advance in control theory I'm talking about is these kind of computer games that can now be played by AIs. You see, or the first one was actually solving the game of Go. That really, in a sense, means you can reduce the tough task of finding this algorithm to just building, just in inverted commas, and I'll say something about that, a simulator, right? In this case, a simulator for the game of Go is probably not that hard to build. Afternoon's work, if you know the rules and the board, and here you go. And actually then the AI itself does the heavy lifting, or these algorithms that have actually been known, but have, like, certain elements of them have cleverly been replaced by iterative neural networks, or even just something else essentially. And so we can solve these things, and that and that gives how shall I put this? This gives a tremendous hope that problems that were before this advance meant to be extremely hard can be solved. If we go, what I think can be achieved, I talked about it a bit earlier. I mean, you can gamify, if you like, the construction of a smart city. If I tell you, okay, well, we believe that people have certain needs, how far they are from work, how long they would like to commute, health that they need to have, pollution aspects that we don't want to expose them to, and so on, that actually defines a game. Now, there need to be economic factors, what can people afford, and so on, and where do we start out with in the way we live. And now you could ask a computer, if you actually define such a game, right, and you had a very good set of rules that you can measure, a question for the computer would be, please find a strategy where this is optimized. And then maybe the strategy is construct a city for us. Similarly, fleet routing would be similar. Yeah? So that was the advance in control theory I meant, and I think there is a lot of mileage still in there. Plus, yes, the general ability of modern machine learning to recognize patterns, like as we saw overnight, protein structures can be predicted. That is pretty amazing stuff, and maybe something that people 5 years ago would not have expected to happen.
Yeah, it sounds like going from a board game to operating a fleet of vehicles is a big leap, but it sounds like you described it very well. I'm going to turn to Marianne Glasser. And your work with cars, you've done some great work with your startup. And what I was really interested in was this night vision camera images. You're turning nighttime into daytime. And I was wondering if you could describe the technology behind that, It's known as this deep natural anonymization technology. And why is that so useful for autonomous cars?
Yeah, sure. I would shortly say something about a bit brighter AI, because I think we're the new kids on the block of Vodafone, and here quite established. And so exactly what you just said, a deep natural anonymization, it's kind of like the core technology that we offer. And in the mobility automotive space, we sit right before Vodafone actually delivers the video data to here to be used. And the moment that you have in public data that is being captured on the street, you have certain objects that are seen, like faces and license plate, that might be conflicted with privacy. And this is where we offer our technology to be this enabler to actually allow data in large volume to leave cars and then being used by analytics or the OEM or tier one afterwards to improve the vehicle behavior. And whether it's then afterwards being used for reinforcement learning, or and we started off the discussion in the mobility space, and what Nacho and Michael said there, I found very, very interesting, because it's the two spaces where we engage. So on one hand, we originate from the automotive industry. We're incorporated in 2017 out of Hella, and since then working with almost all the major tier ones and OEMs to supply data privacy for testing and mapping vehicles. And on the other hand, since last year, we engaged in the public transport smart city space, where they are facing essentially the same problems. On one hand, smart cities, one of the key enabler will be cameras, as there are very cheap sensors. They're widely available. They're already integrated in the infrastructure. And on the other hand, they offer one of it's one of the sensors that offers most data points to be used for AI and to run advanced analytics. And also there you have the moment that you put up a camera in public in Europe, you of course very fastly are circling around privacy, and this is a dilemma that we don't see that actually needs to be a problem with new types of solution. This is why we developed an anonymization for camera data, which anonymizes with artificial faces and artificial license plates. After the words, the data can still be used for any kind of neural networks and being trained. But with without the problem and conflict of privacy. And in the mobility space and smart cities, I think Nacho talked quickly about train scheduling improvement, about what we're looking at is cameras that are trying to understand the distribution with the passengers within the train. So to allow, it's a project that we have with the Deutsche Bahn, that they can give a feedback back to the passengers where to enter the train, whether it's in the front or the back, to also distribute the distance between the people and have also positive effect on COVID-19, but even more for convenience functions, so that you don't actually feel the person's arm next to you because it's too crowded, but have a better distribution. And that then leads towards better train scheduling. So we see here with a simple camera technology and advanced AI, basically touch points how to improve convenience functions for passengers all across the train journey. And that goes also for other smart city examples. And then there was the question of timeline and when do we think those things are happening? I think so too. They are happening now, and it's very fascinating to be in this time and be basically in a part of this industry that actually brings the data to life, and then afterwards allowing the analytics. But I think that we are moving in some parts much faster than in others. So when it comes to convenience functions, like what I just talked about, the distribution of people on the train, I think those kind of applications are also one of the ones that we're looking at, is how to improve the cleaning stuff, looking at where the train or where the public infrastructure needs to be cleaned, and then I basically have a dynamic schedule of it. I think those kind of use cases, they will come and arrive us much earlier than, for example, regulating a traffic light. And on one hand, it does make sense that some of the functionalities come sooner, but I think that for regulations, it might make sense to push the use cases that are more tricky to bring onto the road, like traffic light controlling, with a different kind of perspective, that those can't be the use cases that everybody is afraid about, and they will never get their momentum. But to actually also look at them as one of, like, how can we make this possible to very soon and fast test it in the industry. So Matthew, sorry for answering this question a bit longer. The opening round, I was making some notes what I would say, and since we jumped now to the next question, I wanted to answer that. But I hope I also answered what is the deep natural anonymization. Just recapping back, it's an anonymization for image data that allows afterwards being used for any kinds of analytics without the conflict of privacy.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. It makes sense a lot in autonomous driving, but also in this in the context of a train station as well. I don't know if Eileen went over this, but one of the things I'm calling in from Brussels, sort of the policy hub for Europe. And one of the things that's going to come out, there's the AI policy that's going to come out next year. But just recently, last week, we had this Data Governance Act. And so I'm wondering that you guys are deep into research, deep into the business, trying to start up new businesses. And I'm wondering what kind of policies that the EU should be pursuing right now to support the transition to automated driving. And perhaps you can talk a little bit about the problem of data, because data is the raw material that you need for AI systems and access to data. So the European Commission is talking a lot about improving the access, creating these data spaces. Is that important for you? Is the EU going in the right direction? And maybe we could just start with Nacho.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Matthew. Yeah, I think it's important, of course, and we've been following very closely the Data Governance Act and reading very carefully. And you can also read our very senior leaders' articles, for example, in Politico last week about this and our official position. It is, of course, very important, and we share the main objectives of the Data Governance Act, right? So data sharing, data reuse, and so we can really unlock the latent value of that data. What I do have, though, is I share some of the views that Michael shared before, right? About this fear of maybe over-regulating some things, and I can understand how we are as humans driven by fear here sometimes, right? And of course how we also as Europeans, and as it is in our culture, we want to regulate things to be sure that everything is controlled, and it's actually something that makes us feel safer, and I think that is very important, right? Because even if we develop the new technology things, if actually final users, actually citizens, they don't feel safer about using them, so then there is no point on developing all that stuff, right? So we share the objectives and the scope of the Data Governance Act. But what we also think that is important is to get some guidance from Europe to the end-to-end process of data governance, because what we are actually seeing is that right now, most of European business, what we are doing is to rely on external service providers, which are mainly US based providers. And I think if we can get this law and regulation environment to be a solid basis in which we can build our technology solutions on top of it, I think we will help a lot all the European business and also different startups that we have here to feel more confident, and of course our final users, our citizens, also to feel more confident about using all these services. So I think it is very important. We really share the objective of the Data Governance Act. We think that it's something that we needed. We actually would like to see more of that in the end-to-end of the data governance processes. But also we have to be careful to not, as Michael mentioned before, to not over-regulate and not to be driven by fear. Because there are other players here, right, that are maybe they are not European-based, Europe-based, but we are no longer playing in a regional area. This is a globalized competition board, and so there is that risk of us being short-handed here if we over-regulate, right? So I think that's our position, and it's important. We support it, but there are some risks there that we have to take into account.
Matthew, we cannot hear you. Sorry. We cannot hear you, Matthew.
Sorry. I just was saying, Michael and Marian, if you want to jump in and add anything to that, or we can go on to the question. Oh, I see we have a question from the audience.
Yeah, I would, but Marian, I don't want you to be shortchanged.
Marian, do you have any thoughts about EU regulation, EU policy?
Yeah, yes, so I want to quickly piggyback on the data spaces, open data and data sharing. We are in the space of data privacy and compliancy, governmental tech, in that regard. And what we see is, even in the complex field of where privacy very often can at first hand somehow limit the possibilities of what can be done afterwards with data. Even in that space, it's very hard for a privacy tech company to really fulfill regulations when they are not 100% clear, or when it's able to be taking them in different perspective, and it's not quite clear for bigger corporates or also a startup how to really comply. And what I mean is, when we, for example, are talking about anonymization, anonymization makes data compliant by the GDPR, but what is really anonymous is not 100% defined, which makes it more difficult for our clients. It makes it more difficult for us that this gray zone of what really anonymized means prohibits the open and sharing of data afterwards. And I think that it comes with not having a fear on one hand, what Nacho and Michael just said, but on the other hand, whatever is regulated, to give a certain clarity on what this actually means for a company. Because if it doesn't, you will not be able to create those open spaces and those data sharing opportunities to then flourish the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Michael, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'll be very quick. So I think Nacho and Marian already outlined it very well. I think what we need is smart regulation, not over-regulation, not driven by fear. I think we need harmonized regulation. I also, again, on data is the fuel that makes AI work, and with which these things can actually, these values can potentially be lifted. And there we really need to have a common standard, make the data that we can make public, aggregated and depersonalized and so on, and absolutely make that available across Europe, and maybe even, you know, think more about initiatives like the SCC, where we have common standards in contracts for data exchange outside of Europe. If that makes it harder to share data, then this doesn't make any sense, because otherwise data is in a sense global. We would like to learn from, let's say, traffic patterns in the US and transfer things into Europe and the other way around. It's not just a local market, it is probably a global market and global phenomena that we want to address. And last but not least, in order to enable all of this industry to be in Europe, and I don't think, and this is what I meant by fear, and I think, Matthew, you were not yet on the call. So I come from near Stuttgart, which is the hub of automotive. And when I look around, everything is Zuliefer and so on. I think there's a fear that with new technologies emerging, that maybe this industry could kind of, you know, maybe move from there. And I think we need to not do that. We need to embrace it. And in order to enable it, we need to have also what Marian mentioned. We need to have long-term planability, so legal security, hopefully across Europe, investor security, that this doesn't change from one day to the next in one country and is gone. And I think we need to be more enabling, so have framework agreements around privacy, be clearer, make the case, and then also bring the people along. I think, you know, these discussions help, but being open about what the positives and negatives of AI can be, and convince an electorate in the end that the positives outweigh the negatives, and the negatives will sadly also occur. Yeah? And there needs to be a social consensus around that.
You're absolutely right, and I'm sure everyone is aware of what happened earlier this year with these attacks against the 5G masts and the amount of disinformation. And this is just, you know, spread like wildfire on social networks, and actually results in real destruction of equipment. So there's a lack of trust. And then from the policy point of view, I saw just in the last couple of weeks that the e-privacy talks between the various EU governments have collapsed. Basically, they can't get an agreement, and part of it was about definitions of anonymization. I just want to turn to Nacho about a use case. So one of the things he's probably working on every day is working with these radio access networks and the masts and the poles and transferring data. And Vodafone's been using AI algorithms to process these anonymized data sets. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that, how you're working with companies, IBM in particular. I think you have some work going on. And then if you can go into, and I'm going to use some of the jargon here, but the multi-access edge computing, that seems to be a nice buzzword for in AI and real-time responsiveness for autonomous driving. How is that moving along? Maybe you can give us an update on that and into the mobility sector.
Yeah, Matthew, sure. I mean, yes, of course, it is a buzzword. It's one of the new ones. We're having new buzzwords in the area every week. It is very important for us. If you think about Vodafone or telco in general, and how can be or what can be our role in this. Of course, autonomous car has to be a fully connected car, right? And we don't want to have any kind of lag in a car that is driving for us in an autonomous way. And we want a really fast connectivity. So that's why it is very important for us, as you mentioned, all these 5 investments that we are doing on guaranteeing that all those autonomous systems can be really connected and connected by the fastest possible network. Then there is another way of solving this, actually, which is what you just mentioned. Is okay, you can have a really fast connectivity. So whatever happens somewhere else, they can be transferred to the car. But this edge computing is another way of solving that, right? So, well, maybe you don't need to, or you don't need to rely that much on that connectivity and sending things back and forward. But there should be some things that you can run on site, that you can run there, right? That you can run on the device. So, of course, that's also very important for us, and it's going to be very good for traffic in our network, and also it's going to allow to develop new applications. So it's something that that of course we are working in different spaces. Not, I mean, of course, with Vodafone Automotive in the area of cars and mobility, but also for IoT. That's something very, very important for us. It's not only about cars that are going to be connected, but lots of different kinds of devices. And we as Vodafone Business, if you allow me to brag a little bit here, we're leaders in the IoT vertical. So that's very, very important for us. And that's a huge difference. So you have lots of different devices that need to be connected. Not all of them have the same requirements in terms of amount of data, requirements about the speed. Not all of them want to be 5G connected, but the fact that you can run things on edge, on the device, it's really going to be a differentiator, a game changer. And so that's why we are working a lot on that space. I think you also mentioned something about data anonymization, right? And how can we work with in that environment? That's huge for us. You guys can't imagine the amount of work that we put on security, privacy, and anonymization of our data. Even for our data scientists, there's lots of process that you have to follow in order to be able to work with some data sets. And even in that case, most of the things that you are going to see are going to be just encrypted keys that you cannot really know what is happening. We are not interested in any personal data, in any private data. We want to understand patterns and how can we then unleash some insights out of them. There is no actual interest on any personal or private data, but still, if were for any strange and malfunction idea, or it's not technologically is not possible. We put lots of efforts in anonymizing all data, and also something that I think is very important, on giving our clients the power to decide, right? To say, okay, it's very easy for you to opt out of every kind of data analysis or this type of data analysis. It's very transparent, it's very easy, and actually we don't want to run any analysis that our customers don't want us to run. So I think that's very important. It is true, though, that the process of a machine learning project, of a database project, has changed. And now you have lawyers in the table too. And now you have security, safety, you have IT, privacy. You have lots of different teams in the table day one of the project, which of course makes things to run maybe slower, as Michael was saying before, right? If we over-regulate things, as a consequence, we will be slower potentially on developing new things. But on the other hand, of course, once we have built it, we can be very sure that everything that we're doing is safe, is following every privacy by design approach, is very responsible with our customers' willingness. So it's a balance, right? And I think it's a tricky one.
An interesting balance. And Marian, I was wondering that you talked about use cases with the automobiles and also with the train stations. But do you see other kinds of use cases, let's say with maybe smart cities with rental e-bikes or sharing cars, and there's always an element of data privacy with that, because you have to log in and put in your data. So that's also a potential for hackers and all that. Do you think that what we really have to think really strongly about how to prevent those kind of attacks, kind of infiltrations, from the very beginning, like what Nacho was mentioning, the privacy by design. Is that what you're thinking of at Brighter AI?
We are so Brighter AI is not in the area of structured data, but more unstructured data and images. So login data of vehicles we're not explicitly looking at, but it all in a mesh of data. It all kind of like comes together, right? You having the login data from the vehicle. You might also have a certain driver profile during the driving from a fleet, and you then also have the camera data, which we're looking at, and privacy by design and privacy and looking at this data, it becomes very fast, very tricky. As Nacho said, it's not only lawyers, but also cybersecurity and all those different elements that look at each data point that needs to be harmonized. And what we feel is that there are certain ways to make this data processing easier, and while with new technologies to make it basically for companies easier to be compliant. The moment, for example, anonymizing the video data, but on the other hand, there's always basically if you add another data point and another data point and another data point, at some point you cannot prevent that it's somehow possible to retrack the original person, right? The more data points you have, the more you can build up a mesh about all those different data points, and then maybe make this personalizable and make this data possible to identify a single person. But those are this fear perspective of what if you have another thing, and what if you add another source to that data? Does it then become privacy conflicting? And in theory, you could end up this route and this train and always come to a yes, but this is not how eventually we will be able to move forward. I think there needs to be a per domain, per solution, a certain limit where you say, okay, this is what it's meant for, and this is the data points that we need, and those are the ways of how we are handling it responsibly. Some of it depersonalizing, some are anonymizing, some keeping it secure, and leave this domain leave this application and domain by what it is, and not extending it by fear to make it more complex than initially thought, and leave it by the purpose of what this application was used for. And and since we are only one layer in this data ecosystem, and I know that telcos have a lot of different personalized data which needs to be handled and needs to be depersonalized. I see this as an industry problem, having those constraints of what if you add something else, and actually you're going outside of the application purpose for a discussion that then only becomes about privacy.
We only have about 2 minutes left, so if I could just have your very, very brief comments. We had a question from the audience about liability rules, and if you could just briefly say that whether or not you think that they should be changed when we're talking about autonomous vehicles. Very briefly. We'll start with Michael. 30 seconds.
Sure. Okay, fantastic. So I think what's important is that these rules we have will have social acceptance, and that they're durable for at least a certain amount of time. So I think it's not up to me to really say what I prefer, but I think we need answers, we need them quick, and we need them harmonized, and we need to stick to it. So that, to me, but I see the case, so overstepping my 30 seconds, I see the case. These are very difficult ethical questions.
Nacho, any thoughts about liability rules?
I think that's a very good question, and I think any new requirements or liabilities should be really targeted at should be more specific and really targeted at providers of high-risk AI applications. So we may not may not impose like excessive high burdens on industry, which is just deploying AI that presents low risk to you, European Union citizens, right? So I think it's important that we can build a more specific framework so we don't hold back more low risk applications, and at the same time we can target those that we are more concerned about. So that's one change that I think we can make.
Aaron, just 10 seconds, 15 seconds if you can.
Yeah, I would actually agree with what Michael said. Clarity and stability for clear regulation, and also don't think about everything about AI. Liability and safety was always important, and there are certain strategies how to handle them. It doesn't always need to be about AI specifically.
Matthew, I think we still have 10 minutes, I believe, but I might be wrong.
I was supposed to be at 12:30, if I'm not mistaken.
I thought it was 12:40, but whatever.
So I'll if we do have 10 minutes, they'll tell me. But I'm going to cut it off at 12:30. So I want to thank you, three speakers, very much for your thoughts and your comments, and also to thank everyone who tuned in and watched, and also to the questions that you asked. And I'm sorry I didn't get to all of them. So I hope that it's a vast subject, and we just barely scratched the surface. But I want to thank everyone for their participation. Thank you, gentlemen.